So hopefully, again, this is a review from anatomy class. If you had anatomy recently, it will be easier than if you had it a long time ago. Take a minute for it to go big. I don't know why it's being slow. So there is a web link here where I got some of these pictures from, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I looked at these a while back, that you can click on them and it'll tell you if you're right or wrong. So basically, hand and wrist are going to be two different exams we're going to do when you get into positioning classes, but the bones are kind of easier to learn all together. So in our fingers, we have our phalanges, which are our actual fingers that we bend and move, and they are three different bones really, and they have joints between them. So we have a distal, middle, and proximal phalanx, and in the joint we have a distal interphalangeal joint, a proximal interphalangeal joint, and then here are our metacarpals. These bones are what makes up the palm of our hand. So right in here, metacarpals. Phalanges are the fingers, metacarpals are here. So we start with the thumb, that's number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with the pinky. At the metacarpal end is a rounded part, kind of looks like a little head. So we have the head of the metacarpal, and then we have a joint there. So between each of these little joints in the fingers are interphalangeal joints. This is metacarpal phalangeal joint, MCP, metacarpal phalangeal joint, because that's what it's meeting. So that if you kind of know the bones, you can identify the joints, basically. I know I might have another slide with the joints labeled for you. When we're looking at any of these bones, the bottom part is kind of flatter, that's the base, and the top part is more rounded, is the head. So the long center part is the shaft. We will go over this again briefly in the extremity class. When you get to that class, it'll be your second positioning class, but this just gives you a heads up, starting to know these bones now. With the actual wrist bones, so with them, there's a few that you need to know, and there's a little saying that we have. It's in your book when you get it. So try to think which view is the best to look at for that. So we have a right and left hand here, so we're looking at it backwards on one or the other. You want to always start with the row of the bones when we're doing the little saying. I'm trying to think of it because it's different than what I learned when I was in X-ray school. It's send a letter to Peter to tell him to come home. So S is for scaphoid, and that's by the radius side. And the radius and ulna are our two bones in the forearm. And if you remember, you're going to be in RT when you graduate. R for radius, T for the thumb. That's how you can orient yourself, that this is the radius and thumb side of the arm if you can pick out the bone. The bigger one is the radius here. And then you can start with this first bone. That is your scaphoid bone. It's kind of a bigger kind of curve in it. Then we have little small one on this side, on the pinky side, which is our smaller finger. I don't know what'll help you orient yourself when you're looking at it. I'm trying to give you some clues there. So send letter is lunate. 2 is triquetrum. And then we have Peter, which is the pisiform. And you can't see it on this view, and it's kind of hidden. So it's back here when they flip the hand on the other side. So pisiform, send a letter to Peter, and then to tell him to come home. So T, there's lots of T's, that's the only part. Some people remember it by, I think, the ending of it, like D comes before N, so no, that's not it. How do they remember it? Have to ask the other class whenever they come in and talk to you guys. Trapezoid and trapezium. Maybe it's the O. No?
Trapezoid is shorter than trapezium.
Yeah, maybe. This one has TRPEZ, I and O. Maybe it's the I and the O. The I comes before O, so trapezium first, then trapezoid. I think that's how they remembered it last time. Capitate is a big bone in the middle. It's kind of like a big cap that holds everything together. So that's how I remember the location of it. And then hamate is the last one, and there's a hook on the back. So if you flip it over, you can see a little pointy piece. It's better when you look at it and hold the bones in your hand in class. There's a hook on the hamate, so that's how I remember hamate has a hook, and it kind of connects the H's together, but that's our last one. These are probably the more trickier bones to remember. You can Google, if you do not like that saying that they gave in the book, you can probably find another one, but send a letter to Peter to tell him to come home is kind of the one our book uses. And here's an x-ray of it just to get used to looking at that same anatomy in a radiograph. Didn't mean for it to slip away. So we have our joints labeled here, our PIP joint, proximal interphalangeal joint, our distal interphalangeal joint, and then a metacarpophalangeal joint. And you always want to say at the end of that of the fifth digit or the fifth whatever digit you're on. So the metacarpophalangeal joint is on the fifth, and then the distal and proximal is labeled on the fourth, just to be proper on a test question when if you're filling it out or picking it from multiple choice. You would want to make sure you get the right numbered finger or area. And that's really it for those. So hand, pretty easy. Wrist, a little bit more complicated. Once you get that little saying down, now you can really see the shape of the bones better, of the scaphoid having this curved shape and the capitate being this big cap in the middle that kind of holds them all together. Pisiform is always kind of a little shadow underneath. You can't really see it unless you twist the hand and look at it. Again, this is all saved for you under week 1 PowerPoints because I was going to do it on Friday. And this one, close that out. So for today on our lesson, what we want to look at under week 2, let's see. Just to recap where we're at for objectives and everything for the class. We did medical law, patient care, partnership, what we need to do for our patients, safe patient handling and immobilization. That was yesterday. Today we're looking at human diversity, patient interactions, and history taking. So what we're going to do when we pull our patient in the room and ask them those questions and how to interact differently with the different types of patients, age range that we're going to see. And then tomorrow we will have a quiz at 8. So I'll come on at 8, do the quiz, and then you will join in for your CPR class online. Make sure you have those documents printed for him tomorrow that's in the folder. And then Friday, we'll have our exam, and then CPR at whatever scheduled time you have.
Okay, wait, so there is a quiz tomorrow because the schedule says no quiz.
I took it off. No quiz then. Sorry, guys. I said yesterday I had it on there. It was probably on the main syllabus, and then I took it off because we had CPR online. So yeah, good thing we had a lot today. So if anybody wants to do like sample questions, I will post them like I did that one day when we didn't have a quiz, I think, on a link. Oh, it wasn't for you guys. It's what's that little Kahoots? It's a place where you can make up games and quizzes. Have you heard of that before? It's a website. So I'll put some questions together on Kahoots for today's information, so you guys can have that to review before the exam. So kind of a free, you don't have to do it for a grade, but just as a review. If you join in with other people and you set up like a time to log on together, you can challenge each other with it. But if you do it by yourself, it'll just show you the questions. So don't log on until CPR time at home, online, yes. Yep, he said to log in 15 minutes early just to make sure everybody's there on time. He likes to start on time. And he usually, if it's the same guy that comes to campus, is really good. Everybody enjoys his CPR class. If you've never had CPR before, you're lucky, because sometimes it's not a fun thing to sit for 4 or 5 hours learning all the stuff. After you get your certification, you'll have a card. It's good for 2 years. You have to keep renewing it on your own as you work in the field. So sometimes the job renews it for you at the hospital. They'll do CPR classes for anybody that needs it, but depending on where you work, you may have to do it on your own after that.
Is CPR on Kaiser Live or on Zoom?
Kaiser, no, it's a link directly through the link is that he gave you. I don't think it's either of those. I think it's their own, whatever they use.
Is there a paper that we need to sign?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It was he asked for you guys to download and have prepared. So today,
Send the link to our email.
you log in through your email. Is that the question, or?
No, did he send the link to our emails?
No, I posted it under the CPR folder.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on like a little document advertisement thing. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a packet in like week 2 under CPR.
Yeah, all the CPR under that folder, and there's a link, like 3 different things. Yeah.
We print out the ones that that's listed, the handouts for him for the class.
If it says to print them, I think he did say print them and then bring them to class on Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, so whatever it says to do.
Yeah, there's stuff to fill out. You put your name, and then there's like a
He collects that.
test stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So today's chapter on human diversity is chapter 10 in your book. So we got some objectives here that the book lists for us to know by the end of it. Make sure this isn't somebody from class messaging me. I got everybody up here, so I can't really see the slides that are popping up right now. It's mainly to get you used to working with different types of people in the clinical setting, different people that you're going to come in contact with as coworkers or patients. I can't get this to move so I can see the slides. There we go. So characteristics that make people think when we're thinking about diversity. It can be age, it can be their ethnicity, nationality, race, sexual orientation or gender, their mental or physical ability, how they work. Different people have different work style, work ethics. So when you're working in a place, especially in a hospital, you're going to click better with different people, any work environment, but some people may not have the same. There's some people that want to grab every exam that comes off the printer and go and be busy all day. And there's some people that think, I did one, it's not my turn. You have to get the next one. So there can be clashes that come in amongst each other in that, depending on how you feel in your work style and ethic. And then your family status. And again, that could change depending on if somebody's going through something like a divorce or something like that. They're going to change. They're going to change their characteristics of their behavior. Sometimes I haven't lived anywhere else, but I like to travel. And if you've been in the military, you've seen this. Geographic location is going to be very diverse. Different people in different areas are going to be very different. And lifestyle changes, physical features of people in different areas. I did go to Tulum on a cruise. Anybody ever been there to the ruins and the Mayans and all that? You can tell by the way they talk about the culture there and how people were and their ancestors and descendants. They all have the look of the Mayans if they're descendant from them. So different cultures and things have different physical features. Political beliefs also can play a factor. Religious beliefs, of course, hopefully most people know to keep politics and religion out of the workplace, so that should not become a thing, but it is something that's big, especially right now with elections going on and everything. The language that they speak, if they have a disability, and their education level. So we want to make sure that we are aware of these things. If you're young, you may not have seen it very much, or if you haven't had a lot of work experience, depending on your whole history of you. So we're just going to talk on them and make sure you're aware that they exist if you're not aware of it. My brother's dog, he's a needy thing today. He just wanted to come in and out. Sorry. So personal bias is something that's kind of talked about now. Everybody has some degree of personal bias. It's a human characteristic. We want to address it and make sure we're aware of it, but we want to make sure that it doesn't play a role in how we are working, especially with our patients or coworkers. So awareing it and dealing with it is one thing you want to do. There's different quizzes you can Google and do a personal bias quiz and see if you may not be aware of anything you might be in the back of your head having biases against. So these, I've had students argue about some of them. This is by the book. Some certain core values that are exhibited by different ethnic groups. Some of them are somewhat true. People are like, oh yeah, that's true. But these are things that we want to make sure we understand for when we take care of our patients, how we address them and their family somewhat. So some people may be by themselves when they come to the hospital, and some people may have like 5 or 20 family members wanting to come in and see them, especially when a tragic accident happens in the ER situation and things like that, and they can't let very many come back. So we have core values for each different group of ethnicity, where some are place the highest value on the mom or the grandmother, some it's the father. Again, these are just things for you to be aware of. I'm not going to test you on knowing or memorizing what all the different groups are and what their values are. For us in the US, we put a high value on hard work and activity and personal achievement and success, individualism, being efficient, competitive. We're very competitive. We're more material items, which I know a lot of people were posting. This whole COVID thing and being home has shifted some of people's values, and now people are thinking a little differently about that. But being open, direct, and informed. We work all the time. We hardly take vacations anymore in America. Some people don't have very much vacation time at work. Our employees aren't giving us that way, so we can't have those values. So it's kind of different. I know some cultures do the nap, midday nap. We're like, yes, let's bring that to our country and start having that. There's a whole study and books written on the age and generations. We're all picking on these, what are we called, millennials now? Everybody, the millennial, all they can do is text and they don't know how to talk on the phone or communicate. But it's true, different generations were brought up, and if you have a grandparent or someone who's World War II generation, they're really like save their money. They don't like to spend on extravagant things because they grew up needing to do that. We have the baby boomer generation, Generation X, Y, and Z. We are going to kind of look at those, categorize those. Hopefully it's on a slide. I might have to go back into the book to talk more about them and what each generation like error is. But we shouldn't group everybody that was Generation Y or Z as being like everybody's got those traits, but just be aware of that. So when you're dealing with those patients, you understand how to take care of them. So basically, we want to respect each other's personal, whatever their beliefs are, and appreciate it and have empathy for others. And one thing that's hard to separate is empathy and sympathy. This is different from cultural diversity, but sympathy is feeling like sorry and sadness for them, and empathy is understanding how they feel. So it's hard when you see a child abuse case, for example, to not get upset and want to take that kid and not let them go back to the family. And it's hard to separate yourself when you're in the environment and try to not have sympathy at that moment if a patient's really, really sick and might not make it. And it can affect you to where you have to leave the environment and go to the bathroom and cry or something. But you want to try to have empathy and not sympathy to help keep your mind to be able to put it in a box until later. So once you have looked into and understood what these different beliefs are for each culture, then you're going to have cultural competency, which is that you have looked through and studied it and embraced it so that you know that you're not going to discriminate or you know how to treat them. There's one specific culture that the wife can't talk or say anything, you have to address the husband. So in those cases, the husband comes in on the exam and you, the doctor, whoever's explaining things, will address it to him. Hopefully this is common sense kind of thing for everybody. There's lots and lots of studies, courses, and books on multiculturalism and organizations, and they have guest speakers come in and talk at events. So it's a big topic, but as long as you kind of understand it, for us, just making sure that you're going in with an open mind and not going to try to group everybody in one big lump, that everybody should be the same as you, you'll be fine. We want to make sure we don't get into people's personal space. There's some people that have a bubble around them. Some people are very huggy, depending on where they were raised and grown up. And of course, us being just the x-ray tech, I'm sure we're not going to get involved in needing to do that kind of thing. And we will be able to keep our space, be able to communicate with them properly. And especially not after COVID. Yeah, I was looking, I saw a chat come up.
Do you hear chocolate?
Yes, I hear him. You want to go out and check on him?
Mm-hmm. Chocolate. Oh, you're right here. It sounded like he wasn't in the backyard.
No, he's just having a fight with something out there. He thinks frogs are like his toys.
We thought that he was
I can't get it. Just click to the next slide, guys. Sorry, it froze. There we go. So always remember, you're unique just like everybody else. Patient care hinges on understanding, communication, empathy, and healthcare, fostering development of these skills in every practitioner. So let's look at that baby boomer, generation X, Y, and Z in the chapter. And stop share for a second. There's lots of stuff in the chapter that's what I'm going to have you highlight for the test purposes. What we talked about for US, let me find out if I'm skipping the place I wanted to look at first.
The baby boomer stuff is on 111.
Okay, thank you. 12,
What page? I'm sorry.
11.
111.
They have the statistics there, talking about the population and things. Um, so Americans call baby boomers, it's in the paragraph, it's not really bolded or anything, but it's halfway down under the age topic. And it says baby boomers are from 1946 to 1964. And Generation X is 65 to 80 generally. Generation Y is 81 to 99. So I'm sure we have a lot of those here, maybe. And then Generation Z from 2000 to present. The silent generation. I guess they changed it to that from the millennials that everybody was calling them. Oh, here we go. Some say that Generation Y is millennial. That's in the next paragraph down. So baby boomers are a big one because they're the people that are getting older now, and they're the ones that are going into the hospital sick that we're going to be taking care of. There was a lot of people born in that era, so that's hence the name baby boomers. All the people came back from war and everybody started having babies. Page 111, yes, someone typed it in. So that's the reason now we say there's a big shortage in healthcare, because we had lots of people in the population in the workforce and now it's went down. We didn't have a lot of people having babies in the 70s because that was the hippies and flower child and women's rights, and nobody was getting married and having kids. They wanted to do what they wanted to do. Then in the 80s, we got more back into the family again. And then in the 90s, we had all kinds of change and people weren't getting married. Women were like having kids later in life. And so we had a different shift in population again. So we're going to have ups and downs and hills in the workforce in the future, foreseeing that. That's just another thing that's tracked when we're looking at these generations and populations and things like that. But that's a whole nother topic. You want to make sure you know what ethnicity is. That's on the characteristics title right before this, the different things that define somebody's ethnicity. I thought this was the chapter that talked about some law stuff is why I'm looking for a second. Yep. Okay, we'll get into that. That wasn't in the PowerPoint. I'm not going to make you memorize everybody's core values again. So that chart, I know you want to look at and know it. So when you get into clinic, you understand it a little bit. I love the page 113. If you want to snapshot that in your phone in case you do come in contact with somebody from another culture and they don't speak English, it says how to say what is your name to the patients. You guys know we did that little skit and Google Voice worked pretty good, so you can always go to Google Voice on your phone too.
I definitely can't read the Japanese.
I know, right? Show them it. Show them a picture of it. So page 115 has some mental abuse information. We were watching a show last night. Anybody seen Boardwalk Empire? Older show on HBO.
Yes, it's a very good show.
Yeah, it's set back in like Prohibition time, but basically one of the ladies on there got put in a mental hospital and like the doctor was doing crazy like experiments trying to cure them. Used to, that was allowed. Experiments were allowed on prisoners and people in mental hospitals. They would do lobotomies. This particular doctor, they said, was after the show, they always do like the directors talking. So we always watch that part. And the director was saying that the show was based off of a real doctor. He was like cutting people's abdomens open, taking organs out of them, thinking it would get rid of their craziness. And this was truly happening. This is like, let's see, the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, I believe. or maybe not, 1930s, 20s, 1920s.
You know, they stopped doing lobotomies in the 1980s.
Yeah, lobotomies were happening for a long time. So in this chapter, it doesn't specifically talk a lot about it, but back in 93, we have the American Disability Act that came into play. So that made things happen so that you can't discriminate and you hire people with disabilities. But I thought it was in this chapter too about not being able to do experiments on people and things like that. Maybe it was another chapter in the book and I just missed showing it to you guys. Maybe it was the legal chapter. But we had laws put in place that we can't no longer do those crazy experiments on mental patients. I'm pretty sure it's this chapter. And that we can no longer do experiments on prisoners and we can't discriminate. So human rights became a big thing, but it's crazy that it took till the 80s for that to become an effect for this, for equal opportunity. Page 117 says developing cultural competency. That very last slide we were talking about, things that you want to know. There's 5 different things for value and diversity. Having some sort of consciousness that it exists, and developing things that you can do to help when you're working with different cultures. So if you work at a big hospital, you're probably going to run into it more than at a smaller community hospital where you're just getting the local people coming to see you. Bigger hospitals like Mayo Clinic and the research type hospitals get people from all over the world to come to them for care. So you'll probably see more of different cultures when you're working at a bigger facility than you would at a smaller hospital. And then anyone who has, again, a second language or anything is going to be more hired probably over someone else. It's going to look good on your resume to highlight those things so that you'll be able to stand out to show that cultural diversity that you have and that you can help them as an employer. There's some questions again in the back of the chapter. Don't forget to look at those because that'll help you with the type of questions we're going to use on the exam from this chapter. This one is more for getting you ready for clinic and dealing with different people. So not a ton of questions. So chapter 11, I'm not going to show the PowerPoint for it. You can look at it if you want to afterwards. We're going to talk about different patient interactions and dealing with different age groups. In the key terms, lots of words we're going to go over that are in this chapter. I don't know why advanced directives is here. We don't do the advanced directive generally. That is something that's a legal document that you can have before you go to the hospital or your very first visit as a patient. They would have you go ahead and fill that out. This is basically where you would say who's going to take care of you and make decisions for you if something happens. It's also the DNR, do not resuscitate orders. If you are going to have brain damage or something like that, you could tell them that you don't want them to put you on life support, or you can say who's going to take care of that decision making if your spouse is there or a family member, you want to be in charge of that. So if you don't have that already in place and you're thinking you might should, now's a good time to think of that, but probably not something I would have highlighted in this chapter. I just want to make sure you know what that is so when you go to the hospital. If a patient comes in as a trauma patient and they've been a patient before and they have their ID, they will look and see if there's a DNR or not. Depending on what that DNR is, if they're a do not resuscitate, that's what DNR means, they will not put a lot of life-saving efforts into it if they're not going to make it. They won't perform CPR. So if you have a DNR ever, and you didn't want it to stay in effect, you have to withdraw it, or else it's still in your history that you are a do not resuscitate patient. Usually you don't think of that until you're old and have someone that might be having to make your decisions for you. So in this chapter, there's a picture like a pyramid on 123, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Very important to know that. So everybody, according to this Maslow, has a hierarchy before they can feel and become self-actualization and feel 100% confident and can go forward and change the world. Everything's perfect in their life pretty much. Your level of that pyramid can change at the drop of a hat. Something could happen and you maybe take down to another level. So you could have everything perfect and then something could happen and it drop you down. But these are kind of like stairs or steps to having everything in line with your life. So right now, some of you may be kind of in the middle or bottom of the chart, depending on if you have food, shelter, clothing. That's number one. You have to have that. Then after that, you can feel safe. And then you can start feeling like a sense of belonging and love. And then you can work on your self-esteem. Then you can think, okay, I can start processing things and understanding things in my life. And then everything starts to come together and you've reached this area or level of consciousness called self-actualization. But it basically says if you don't have food, shelter, and a home or feel safe, you don't have one of those, you're not going to feel safe. So you need all of these things to be able to come up psychologically. So if something happens to a patient and they become homeless, that's going to make them have to start rebuilding all the way over from the bottom up. Changing jobs can also affect people's mindset. They may not feel quite safe yet, or that they're going to be able to support their family and things like that, depending on switching if they are in and out of jobs. So understanding that is going to be important before you even start interacting with patients and being able to take care of them. You will probably see this Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the levels that are on here. We don't get to tell people the history and the results of their exams, but the doctors do, and we sometimes come in after they've gotten bad news or good news. Unfortunately, most of the time, hospital interactions are not the greatest news, so it's always lovely when you get to go to someone who's had good news that they're cured, they're in remission, they just had a baby, they're just finding out they're pregnant and they wanted to be pregnant. Those are all great moments to be able to be a part of. Some people prefer the bad news first. Let me see the bad news, doctor. So that's kind of patient's needs area. But of course, we're not the ones giving that to the patients, thankfully, most of the time. But sometimes they do. I know some students, we were talking about it the other day, want to know, what did you see on my x-ray? They think we can read them. We can see big things, but sometimes we can't see all kinds of injuries and fractures. Remember patient dignity, making sure, especially when they're in that lovely gown that we give them, that they're covered. I sometimes will give a patient 2 gowns, one for the back, one for the front, because the back doesn't ever cover right. Make sure we're keeping them covered on the stretcher when they're going down the hallway, that their gown isn't opened up so people can see up it, that they have a sheet over them, covered, protected, that their bags, if they have a urine like catheter in or a colostomy bag or something, isn't hanging out so people can see that, making sure that's covered, because that's embarrassing for patients. So providing patient dignity is going to be important for us. So you're going to be sometimes pushing stretchers down the hallway, sometimes you'll have a transporter. Page 124 shows a little picture of a patient in the wheelchair, has all of the little legs and footrests on it, not like ours. Has an NG tube coming out of his nose. Looks like he just has some kind of wire coming off of his arm. But imagine like even just that, we can't protect him and cover that, but he probably doesn't feel like he wants people staring at him wondering what that thing is hanging out his nose, sitting in the hallway and waiting for his x-ray. So we kind of have a waiting area for inpatients, usually in the x-ray department, away from the general waiting area for the people walking in. So they feel a little more private and secured until we can get to them to do their x-ray. For the most part, most x-ray departments try to keep a room open for when someone's coming from the hospital floor to us, that they come straight into the x-ray room and they're not waiting in the hallway for very long. So that brings us to our next thing. Go ahead, Michael.
For in a wheelchair like that, if he had a urine bag or a colostrum
We try to
bag,
put it
would
on
it,
the inside of the bag instead of the outside, if possible, like down beside him on the inside, but we want to keep it below the bladder. So occasionally it's going to be showing, unless there's a sheet that you can put over him and kind of flop it over the outside.
Now they do have some of bag covering for them as well, which is nice.
So inpatients, that's the part I was trying to skip to. I didn't mean to get off track a little bit about that, but inpatients basically mean, if you don't know it, that they stay in the hospital. They are admitted and they have a room somewhere on one of the floors where they stay overnight. Outpatients are patients that come in from their house, check in for an x-ray, and go home. So two types of patients, inpatients or outpatients. And we'll be x-raying them throughout the day, both. We usually try to bring our inpatients down in between doing the outpatients. So that's why we have a radiology supervisor at the desk that's kind of scheduling and getting everything for us as we need to do it. Most of the time, inpatients are done bedside with a portable. If they can come down and they're not that sick, then they'll come down to the department, or if it's a procedure that requires them to come down. So outpatients usually do have to wait longer because they're kind of getting worked in between doing the inpatients. So sometimes there's a little bit of a delay or a wait and they get aggravated like they've been sitting out there for an hour. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's only 20 minutes or so before they get in to do their x-ray. So we want to keep them informed if there's a delay and we knew that they've been sitting for a while, we'll go out and let them know you'll be coming back as soon as our room opens up. Sorry for the delay, or something to that effect. Or the front desk person will let them know that. We'll call the front desk and tell them. Patients, friends, and family, we do sometimes interact with them. Just remember, hospitals are a business. So we are trying to get good customer satisfaction at most facilities. So you want to make sure the patients leave happy. So the better we can communicate, that's one way of getting good scores. If they like you and they feel like you were trying to treat them right, they're going to evaluate the hospital well based on that. So we do have a responsibility to the family members too, not just the patient, but we also want to make sure we're not giving away HIPAA information when we talk to the patients. Just if you go get a patient, there's this little acronym that the hospital's made up. Right now, my mind is like skipping out on what it's called. It's like ADEIT, ADEIT, I think. Acknowledge. Anybody else know it? Introduce yourself. Explain your procedure. How long is it going to take for the time for the T? And then tell them goodbye. I can't remember what the end one is, but Miss Osteen, Miss Caldwell, when you guys go to clinic, will probably remind you of that. And the hospital, when you go to your first site, they may give you a card with that on it. So these are things that they expect every single worker in the hospital to do when they go get a patient. Acknowledge them, tell them who you are, explain what you're doing to them, give them a time frame, how long is it going to take, and then greet them, excuse them, let them go, and where they're going to find the results, either from their doctor or they'll call back to the department to get the results. Usually always follow up with their doctor. So we're going to explain those type of things to the patient's family when we take them back. We'll be back in about 10 minutes, whatever you think your exam's going to take.
I have a question. Okay, so on the test, there was a question about talking about the patient to a coworker, right? A medical coworker. So I was under the impression that if we're working together, that we are able to discuss that patient. So are we not able to speak to absolutely no one about the patient? I was confused with that.
It relates to patient care through HIPAA. If it relates directly to taking care of that patient, you can. But was that one the HIV patient?
No, I was just a question about if we could communicate with another medical employee about that patient. And I thought we could, but I got that wrong.
I did it like only the doctor is allowed to talk to other doctors about it. Is that right?
I have to look at all the choices on that one now. Let me sneak over there and see what it was.
I know when I was working in the hospital, they told us we are not allowed to look at a file or talk to another worker about a particular patient unless they have some kind of involvement with that case as well.
Right. If it's directly
I
related
heard that too.
care. So you
It's a
can't
true or false question.
unless it's about the care that you have a question or they have a question about the care. Let me find it real quick how it was worded.
It was like one of the first questions. I know you said that you have yours kind of like price.
Yeah.
I think because it was specific because it said a radiologic technologist allowed to speak with other healthcare members or like healthcare providers about it.
Yes. According to the Code of Ethics, may discuss clinical history with another professional, healthcare professional.
I was kind of thrown with that one. I thought maybe I read it wrong.
I think this one was just because on one of the Code of Ethics is to provide confidentiality or follow through with HIPAA or something. I can't remember how the wording is of our Code of Ethics. So I think that's specifically saying, no, we're not supposed to. But I can see where you would think true if it's directly related to patient care. It's not like never allowed to, because if you're asking about their clinical history with another
Yeah, that's
health.
what I'm thinking, the keyword history.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just if, like, I got that question right, but I can see how it
Yeah.
would go the other way, because if someone above you asks about it and it's a genuine question, it feels weird to be like,
Never. Yeah. I can't tell you anything, HIPAA. Yeah, so I'll look at that one on not using that kind of wording on that question. So it doesn't kind of outright say it, but just for you guys, on page 125, right beside the picture, that paragraph, it's under interacting with friends and family. It's talking about asking for interpretation of images. We already know that you guys can't give a diagnosis or anything. So it's always important, it says, to listen to what they're saying and tell them for this type of question, because you're going to get it a lot, that we don't have that in our job description. We can't diagnose. Of course, you could say that. I'm not allowed to diagnose. It's not in my job description. It's not my pay grade. That's something that some people joke around and say. It's illegal. I'm not a doctor. Best response is usually just saying, let me see who the doctor that ordered it was. That's who you're going to get your results from. And you refer them to the ordering doctor. And then you can also let them know the process from you taking the x-ray, it's going to a doctor to be read, so the results aren't immediately available. It may be 24 hours before they're in the system. So check back with your doctor at a follow-up appointment, or tomorrow call him and see if he has the results yet. Because you taking the x-ray, the results aren't ready yet. It has to go to the radiologist to get read. In most places, it's 24 hours. It's usually the same day. If it's a stat, which means they want the results now, it's within the hour. The rating will be done. And then the doctor will call the doctor that ordered it and tell them the results, or fax it. Yes.
and you would say the same thing if they, rather than them flat out asking you to diagnose them, if they're like, so what do you think about this or that? Like, I wouldn't want to say the wrong thing. Would
Yeah,
you
that's
just say the same thing?
response. Yeah, that's it. Just your doctor's going to be the one to get the results. Call your doctor that ordered it. And you can look on your order, whoever that doctor was, because sometimes the patients don't know. Weirdly enough, they don't really know who ordered it. That happens more with inpatients than outpatients, because outpatients usually come to you from their doctor.
What happens if you accidentally slip and say like the correct thing, like you don't mislead them? Like for instance, they ask what kind of like what kind of break do I have, and you say, oh, you have a compound fracture. Is that okay, or
No, that's against our code of ethics because you're diagnosing.
even though it's okay?
Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah.
even if it slips, that's a no-no.
Yeah, you could lose your license or get fired. Yeah.
Okay, so just shut my mouth and say, doctor will explain everything.
Yep. Even in the ER, a patient whose bone is sticking out and they know it's broken, we can't say it's broken.
We have to like pretend to play dumb.
We can just say we can't tell you or diagnose you.
You might need to do an x-ray just to double check.
We have to do an x-ray, yep. See what's going on.
Wow. Okay, that's good to know.
Even if they know it's broken and they can see it's broken, they're going to say, yeah, I broke my arm, and they know they need an x-ray to see which way the break is and all. So we just can't say anything or diagnose. So different things that we're going to do is verbal communication. Of course, that's number one. And when you talk, the way you say something, the clarity, the tone, the height of your voice, the level of talking is all going to put something to the patient and how they interpret that. So if you say, turn around and face the board, turn around and face the board, turn around and face the board, like different ways you say that to that patient's going to be how they're going to form an opinion of you and how you're talking to them. So you could say it in a nice way, a mean way. Too loud, they're going to think you think they're an old person that can't hear. Too low, they're going to think you don't know what you're doing and you're too shy. So you need to make sure you have a good tone and commanding of a voice if you are trying to get somebody to follow your direction. When you're talking about dose, sometimes patients do know that radiation's bad and they want to know how much x-ray am I getting? Am I going to get cancer from you doing this chest x-ray? So we have a general thing we say for that too. Trying to see what the book says here real quick. Depending on their intelligence level of what, if they're a doctor coming in for an x-ray, they know a lot more than a person who just graduated high school coming in for an x-ray. So you're going to talk to them differently based on your opinion that you formed of them and their intelligence level too. Of course, we've had an x-ray on a radiologist before, and he isn't going to ask us how much radiation, but you're going to be a lot more specific on your centering. You're going to make sure you shield him and do everything by the book because he knows every little thing about it than when you're just taking an x-ray on someone from off the street. But if you're talking about specific dose units with a patient, you would only do that with someone who's probably an x-ray physicist or something. For general population, we talk about sun exposure to radiation that you get from being at the beach all day. A chest x-ray is going to be way less than what you get going to the beach and being out in the sun and sun damage. So we just kind of describe it as that. This x-ray is way less than what you get when you go to the beach for a day. If they need specific numbers, if there's someone who's pregnant and is worried about the radiation dose, then we would refer them to get with our physics people and they would calculate the approximate dose to the fetus.
Would it be considered a med era if they don't put the shield on the person? I had that happen to a friend of mine. They did.
The reason it's tricky is because some exams you can't shield the area of interest because that's where we're x-rays. Some people are like, oh, you're in radiology school. Well, I went and got an x-ray. They'll be telling you, they never shield me. If it's a hand x-ray, yes, they could definitely shield them. There's no reason not to, but it's not something that they're going to fire you for. It is in our code of ethics to provide shielding. So the person doing that probably should be talked to about maybe you should shield some. It's just a habit, a bad habit to get into, not shielding.
Okay.
Yeah. Humor, that's a gray area too. You can tell right off the bat if you have the same humor as a patient by the way they talk to you, then you can kind of bounce off each other as you're positioning them and joke. And then there's some people who are going to be like, why are you acting like this to me if you're a jokester type of person? So humor should be very careful when you use it dealing with patients. Could offend somebody sometimes if you're trying to joke around with them. Some guys are really funny about the shield. I want to protect the boys. And they put the shield around the gonadal area for the guy. And that's just their way of getting the shield onto a patient. But it could offend some patients depending on how serious they are, or if they take that as an offensive. And just kind of be careful at the words you use when you're doing things depending on your humor and their humor. Some people are like this too. Oh, it's my first time doing this. Let's hope I get it right. I don't overexpose you. Joking, but that could make a patient scared, especially if it really is your first day in clinic and you're doing that as your nerves. So just trying to be professional at all times and talking. And even if it is your first day and you want to say that, I wouldn't say that. Go in confident, and you're being watched by a trained RT. They are really responsible for that patient care. You are there to observe, assist, or perform, depending on how confident you feel. Very first day at clinic, you're probably going to be observing more than doing, observing and assisting them. So this is something that gets tricky, this next section, nonverbal communication. Paralanguage is nonverbal. So your attitude, how you stand, if you're like your arms crossed the whole day, everybody's gonna be thinking you're closed off and you don't wanna be open to what they're telling you. So you do wanna watch your nonverbal communications, your attitudes. This is kind of a weird one. Your pitch, your stress, your tone, your pauses, and your speech rate, your volume, your accent, all of that is listed as nonverbal, but it's all to do with how you talk. So it throws people off on test questions. So it's lumped into nonverbal communications, paralanguage, your stress of your voice, your tone of your voice. Some things we can say to patients to get them to give us answers, like exactly where does it hurt the most? And then if you just say it hurts around your stomach, where would you say is the greatest? That's going to give you a different amount of information. That's going to only give you information related to their stomach. What if they're hurting in their back too?
Like you could ask them, can you point to where it hurts?
Yeah, that's always a good one. Body language, that's also the big one with nonverbal communication, how you are. If you're smiling, if you have that mean look on your face all the time, that's going to play a factor on how patients respond to you. Touch, and this is our big one. We are going to be touching patients, and we're going to be touching each other in the lab and positioning each other. We have different reasons that we touch, 3 types. For emotional support, kind of a hand on the shoulder. For palpation, which is positioning when we try to feel for a bone, that's one of our most, or for emphasis, if we want to show them specifically where we're centering, we need this part of your hand in the middle, or place the front of your hand on the board, place the front of your chest on the board. We usually only touch ourselves to show emphasis more than them, but occasionally we do provide emotional support if they get upset. They start thinking too much about what the doctor might find in their x-ray, especially if they're really in there for possible cancer or remission. If they've already been through chemo and they're coming back for follow-up and they're really nervous and upset, you might be wanting to give a little bit of emotional support. But palpation in blue, that's a light pressure with your fingertips to the body to locate a landmark. So the next page, 127, has some pictures. Letter A, B, and C. So fingertip, one finger, two fingers. I usually do about 3, I guess. Sometimes 2. You do not want to use your whole hand because that could be like feeling, groping. So just fingers. And when you guys are palpating each other, don't poke too hard. People complain that you guys are bruising each other in the lab when you get into abdomen class, that you're poking so hard on them that they go home with bruises. Not on purpose, but just that you're getting poked a lot by everybody. Some of you may have more prominent bones than others, and they stick out, and you can lay down and see the hip bones poking out. You're going to be the favorite. We don't even hardly have to palpate you. We can just see it. Some of you may have, like me, a little bit extra soft adipose tissue that you have to dig down a little bit to find the hip bones. So those are going to be the patients and on each other that are going to be the ones, oh, you're poking me too hard. Some of you may be ticklish. Some patients are going to be ticklish. So applying a light pressure is going to be important for not over getting them tickled too much. I try to do like a karate chop sometimes too. Go
Are
lay
you
down.
chopping wood or sawing wood?
This is a dog. Come here, Chapo. Come here.
Okay, I was like, what is that?
He has a breathing problem, and he just went outside, and now he's hot. I'm gonna text my daughter to come see if he can go back to
A
her.
bulldog or a pug?
Me too.
What is he? A bully. He's like a
bully?
bulldog. Yeah, here. Come here. He's so
Show us. Show us.
Oh,
Oh, shut up. He's so
oh
cute.
my goodness.
You say hi? Yeah.
That reminds me of Poe.
He's like, hi, Zoom meeting.
I had a
have
bony
pets for you
chicken
guys.
mix.
It
Looks
takes a
like a pug on steroids.
long time. He's hot. You're sweaty. Go. Here. Go get your rug. Go play over there. Ugh, you're all sweaty. So karate chop is another way I find the crest, but we'll talk about that when you get into abdomen and chest class. Oh, I didn't get a text my daughter to come get you. So your professional appearance is in here. That's why we have a uniform. You have to look the part, and it makes you have that confidence even when you don't know anything at clinic. Oh, he's gonna lay down. Okay, he's being quiet, so we'll let him stay. So having that appearance helps you go in looking the part, and the more you can fake it till you make it, the better. That's a little saying we have. Just pretend like you know what you're doing for a while, even when you don't. We have, of course, you have to have good personal hygiene. Avoid wearing colognes that are too strong, too much perfume, cigarette smoke. Those kind of things are going to make patients nauseous if they smell that in the hospital environment. So make sure you wear your deodorant, but don't wear too much of the other stuff. So physical presence is going to be important to, if you look like you just woke up and rolled out of bed and slept out on the sidewalk like a homeless person, you're probably not going to make the patient feel very comfortable with you doing their x-ray. Couldn't have went in with my sunglasses and my eye patch today. I would have had to stay home from work. It's actually better now. I guess whatever I did helped it. Visual contact, eye contact is going to be important. You don't want to be looking at the floor while you're trying to tell your patient what you want to do. Look at them when you're talking to them. And having a good posture. Have you ever thought about having to do an x-ray on somebody you can't see that's blind? Page 128 talks about visually impaired blind patients. So I have had to do an x-ray on somebody who was blind and deaf. That was very hard. and they were an inpatient, so they were in their bed and they were sleeping, and we had to kind of wake them up and try to, I guess they were used to it because they can't see and they can't hear, so they're used to everybody just kind of touching them and startling them a little bit to do what it is that they needed to do. It was a very interesting case.
How was that? Like,
Yeah, it was not something I ever thought about before that happened. They had a big sign above the bed saying deaf and blind. And we did it like they were unconscious kind of, but they weren't. They were really awake and conscious. Most of the time you're going into rooms where people are kind of like that when they're intubated and they're knocked out and asleep, and you don't really talk to them because you just do your x-ray and leave. So that's kind of how we did it. But it was kind of weird because they weren't knocked out and unconscious. They could move and sit up for us, and we just kind of patted them on the back and let them know. And I guess after being an inpatient for so long and having x-rays before, they already knew kind of what to do. And we just tapped them on the shoulder when it was time to lay back and pushed them back, and they laid back on the bed. You're gonna have speech and impaired patients, hearing impaired patients. Sometimes they have a hearing aid where they can hear or they can read lips. So you wanna make sure you're talking where they can see you, not with your back turned if they're hearing impaired. We have lots of times non-English speaking patients. Imagine you being in another country where they're talking to you in another language and you have no clue what they're telling you. So we want to make sure we are trying to help them understand what's going on by having an interpreter, a staff member that speaks their language, a family member that speaks their language. I love the using Google Voice now. And then we also have mental impaired patients. So that's probably the hardest because they can understand some, but we don't know how much understanding's going on with them. Most of the time they're gonna have a sitter, a care sitter person with them that they're used to that helps to coordinate their doing and following our directions. So that's always helpful. Somebody like that knows their triggers, what makes them upset. We had a guy who, if you touched him, he would jump and like try to hit you. So we knew that, and the caregiver would calm him down and help us with anything that we needed to do when we had to touch him or move him. So you always want to be careful. They are very strong, mental, for some reason. If they have a mental disability, they get a superhuman strength. You don't want to treat them like they're stupid though, because some people are very, very smart and they can follow directions, especially if it's dealing with autism patients or something like that. So substance abuse is another one. It could be the nicest person in the world, but when they're drunk or on something, they're going to act totally different. So sometimes those patients are going to have armed security with them because they already are belligerent and not wanting to stay in the hospital. If it's one of those bake rack patients, those kind of situations, we will try to deal with them if we can. If we feel like we're not going to be able to get the pictures because they're not going to cooperate, there's no sense wasting our time. We'll come back later when they're more cooperative. But if the person's really, really bad, they'll restrain them. And then we'll do the x-ray, or they'll sedate them if they can. But most of the time, if they're impaired, they won't give them any kind of sedation or medicine because they're waiting for the alcohol or whatever to wear off, whatever drugs were in their system. We're going to be dealing with mobile exams on patients, like I said, that are knocked out unconscious and attached to a ventilator in the ICU rooms. You don't ever want to bump the portable machine into the ventilator and have anything get knocked off, because that's what's making the patient breathe and live. So you want to be very careful in those type of situations. You don't want to pull out any lines or IVs. The nurse is going to be very upset with us. So we don't want to act like just because they're on a ventilator and unconscious that they can't hear us, because some patients have reported remembering everything people say while you're in the room, even though they can't respond to us. So sometimes I still let them know what's going on as I'm doing it, because they could have some consciousness to what's a hard board going under their back and things like that. So I still will talk to them. In your OR patients, most of the time, we don't have very much where we touch them and do. We're just following what the doctor orders us to do with the C-arm. So we don't have much patient communication in that situation. Now is your guys' part. We're going to do a breakout and do these age groups. had it broken down into 5, but it looks like they even break it down even a little bit more. So in the front of the chapter, there's a little section on the patient age. It's on page 121. So I'm going to number those. Pediatric patients, that's going to be group number 1. Young adults, that's going to be group number 2. Pediatrics is on page 129. Young adults is on 131. Group number 3, middle age. Group number 4, mature adults. And group number 5, geriatrics. So I'm going to put you in the breakout groups, 5 groups. You're going to read over your section and come back and tell us how the book says to deal with that age group. So in the front on page 121, if you look at the age as a factor, there's 5 different groups: pediatrics, young adults, middle age, mature adults, and geriatrics or gerontology. Those are our 5 breakout rooms. So you can number those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's see what room you go to now. Should be about 2 people in a room, maybe 4 it says today. That room says cute. Okay, April and Candy, you're going into 1. I think you have to accept it.
Because you want them to be as comfortable as possible. They said you want to give a few extra minutes with them. You don't want to give them the same time frame you would an adult because it is going to take a little bit longer. And then anything you can do, it said extra skills or toys, anything effectively to try to get them to understand what's going on, that they're in a safe environment, that you're not there, you know, not to say hurt, but to let them know everything's okay and to try to do what the best you can special for them.
Yeah, and then you as a tech are going to develop your own, what you like to use for immobilization accessories and depending on the situation. Did you guys have someone to break it down through the age divisions?
What do you mean?
Oh,
Oh, like the birth to year toddlers? We
I know.
can. It's just how they talk to them. I know the birth of the year was you want to be like, oh, are you okay? Steady, soothing voice. It's all right. That's okay. The 1 to 3, they know kind of a little more what they're doing. They understand you a little bit better. So there was like, see, it doesn't hurt mommy. You can kind of show what you're doing on to the parent, which sometimes will let them feel a little more secure. The preschoolers was the 3 to 5. You want to try to establish more of a relationship. Big, little first, good job. Look how you're such a big boy. You're such a big girl. Look how great, things like that. And that'll progress through the school age and adolescence. Adolescence, I feel like may give you a little more attitude. We'll just say that. But they're more body aware. So when you're telling them to do something, they're more aware of, okay, this is my left side. I'm going to put it here, doing things like that.
Yep, and you can treat them as more like an adult talking. Making sure the babies, like she said, keep a toy with them or a blanket, keeping them close to your body if you're holding them, or taking them to give to the mom or dad so that they don't feel like they're going to fall. Little babies are used to being held tightly. So if you've never had kids before, that's just a tip for them. Some people, have you ever seen the first time the dad holds a baby who's never held a baby before? It's always so funny watching them. They like keep them out away from their body sometimes. Toddlers is the big ones. They're going to be the ones who are scared of us the most, probably, because it's doctor environment where they kind of know what's going on and they're used to being hurt.
And their communication skills aren't very effective. Like, they don't really know how to communicate yet, so they just cry because they don't really know how to do anything else.
And then
express their emotions correctly.
Great. Usually they love pleasing people at this point. They like getting rewards. They follow directions if you encourage them. So they're going to be the ones that can help us unless they're really hurt and trauma, and they're going to be frozen. However, they're holding their arm and they don't want to move it in any direction because it's going to hurt them. Who's not? I'm trying to figure it out right now. Right here. She jumped. All right. Who had young adults?
All right. I had young adults with a few other.
That's a real.
Yeah. So basically, I'm just going to just read what young adults is. So young adults are usually entering new roles of responsibility at home and in their work. They often experience problems in handling their multitude of new roles and may neglect one area while they concentrate on another. For example, focusing on child rearing at home may result in neglect at work duties. Conversations and interactions should be on the same level as for other adults. This is basically at a point where someone's coming into their own, they're trying to juggle work, job responsibilities, and it could be frustrating, anxiety inducing, and this is when they're starting to go and to experience all that.
Yeah, so basically you guys are at that age range pretty much. You know what it's like to be young adults, trying to juggle everything in life.
Caitlin, if you wanted to.
Yeah, we discussed that if like we had to interact with them, that we would talk to them like they were obviously adults. We would talk to them like talk to any other adult. We would maybe call them sir, ma'am if they're okay with it, or call them by like Mr. or Mrs. Other than that, they know how to follow directions, so I guess we don't have to really do anything with.
Yeah, they're probably going to either be the ones to talk about their kids with you as a general small talk conversation or talk about their job, pretty much. That's the easiest way to have conversation with them because of their way they are in life. All right, who had middle age?
So we had middle age adults, which range from 45 to 65 years. I would say they're very selflessness because they're comfortable with the roles and success of their life. And they're more concerned about what's going on in their job and their families. I would say offer support and reassurance to them because they're concerned about providing for others and reassuring them that it's equal to providing for themselves. And I would say some middle-aged patients are also going through, they're experiencing aging of their body and new medical issues. So I would say that causes a lot of stress, and that's where the reassurance that they're doing good for helping themselves would come in.
Yeah, so they put their health off a little bit. They're so busy wanting to take care of everybody else, they put their own self last.
And a lot of their stress comes from like when they're sick, they're not as worried about them, but they're worried about like having to take off work and how that affects their job and their money, their family. They can't take care of anyone else if they don't take care of themselves. So just trying to like reassure them of that and help them not stress as much about it. Let them know they're making the right decisions.
Yep. And then that also comes into play where we're going to see that age range having more bad health issues come on because of them putting off their health. And then we have mature adults. Who has that group?
We had that group. The mature adults, they consider themselves middle-aged, not geriatric. And their self-image is basically like they see themselves still young and vulnerable, even though they're old and wrinkled. It's basically like, like we were discussing in the group, I was like, it's basically like how you see your parents. Like my mom is 70, she'll be 71 this year and everything else, but she doesn't consider herself like old. She's just like, don't treat me like I'm old and everything else. Like I joke with her sometimes, like, hey, I'll put you in a home. And she's like, hey, cut that out. That's when my full name comes out and everything else. I get in trouble with her. But I mean, it's you treat them with the ultimate respect. It's like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am, and everything else. And you talk to them with that kind of respect and everything else. And if something needs explanation as to why, I guess a procedure needs to be done or something, and if you give it to them and you give them the explanation and the courtesy that is due to them.
Yeah. And this group is the one your book says that they watch shows like Dr. Oz, or they get their information from the internet and WebMD and things. And so they come in with piles of paperwork and research on whatever their doctor told them they're having wrong with them and what they've researched and compiled. So they're the ones that are kind of over-informed on their health.
Dr. Oz and Dr. Google is what my mom says.
Yeah. And then we have the very last, geriatrics is just a category, I guess you could say, of the older people. So I guess we could have left that one out of this situation, but who had that group? We'll see what you guys can tell us from that section.
We did.
So we had that group, and then geriatrics or gerontology is the study of aging and diseases of older adults. It went on to talk about how this group is increasing in size and importance in American societies. Don't refer to them as geriatric because it's inappropriate. And using terms such as senior citizens or golden agers. Talking very slowly or childish or loud to them is considered disrespect.
Yeah. So just because they're older does not mean they can't hear. So, and even if they are where they need assistance with hearing, they usually have hearing aids or something where they don't need you to yell at them. So you don't want to just think that they're not going to be able to understand you. You still want to talk in a clear voice. A deeper voice usually helps with patients who have any kind of issue anyway. It's not the height of how loud you are. It's the tone that they can pick up on. So a meek or a softer voice is not good to use when you're dealing with people who have hearing issues in general. You want to use a deep, stern voice or deeper voice. They're also categorized in this age table that your book has. It's on page 132, young, old, and oldest old. From 65 to 74 is the younger. And then 75 to 84 is the middle, the olds. Transitional, they say. And then 85 and older is once they're the oldest, they start becoming more frail, have easier hip fractures and fractures happening to their body and bones and skin. Tears in the skin happens a lot more easily, and bleeding and things like that are going to happen, bruising, contusions on their skin once they get up into the 85 and older. But I've seen some 85-year-olds who are like still running and doing the river run and like super healthy. So you'll be surprised once you get out there. You'll see some 40-year-olds who are like barely able to walk, and then you'll get an 80-year-old who's like walks with no walker. So interacting with terminally ill, that's our next section. We have this Kubler-Ross hierarchy, another kind of chart or table. They don't have a picture of it in the book, but it's basically a study that was done and has pretty much become the standard for the stages of grief. And with stages of grief, people can go in and out of these different levels at any time. It's not like Maslow's hierarchy of needs where you start at one and work your way through them. You can stay stuck in the anger phase and then get into the bargaining and denial or back and forth through these stages. So in this section, and it doesn't even have to be with just terminally ill diagnosis. It can be anything that you're going through stressful in life. You could have a big check you got and you lost it, and you were going to deposit it in the bank, and you can go through these stages. Someone could cut you off in traffic and you could get mad, and you could go through these stages. So it could be anything that could set this into emotion. So let's talk about the events or the stages that are here. Looks like someone's knocking at my door. Trying to see if they have it in order at one point or another, which I don't see. So you could have denial happen where at first you are so shocked that you've given this diagnosis, you just don't believe it. You're in denial and you don't want to tell anybody about it. You just kind of ignore it for a little while. So that's one area. You could go into anger. You can be very mad at the person who told you. Maybe someone made you go to the doctor and get that blood test. You'll be mad at them. Why did they make me do this? Anger. Then we have bargaining. That's where you could start saying, please God, let me make it through my son's graduation and wedding, and then I'll deal with this, the bargaining stage, where you start bargaining and saying, if only this goes away, I'll start living better or doing better, or this or that. So you could have a bargaining stage. Then after that, you could go into a depression stage. So after you've gone through the treatment and everything, they could go into deep depression, the book says. You could be depressed after starting your treatments. Any of these could happen at any time throughout the process. And then finally, another area that's going to happen is acceptance. You've thought about it and you finally accepted your diagnosis, and you're going to fight and you're going to get better and you're going to make it through. But acceptance could also be short-lived. Then you could start back over again and get angry and go back through the denial. So these are the stages of grief that Dr. Ross has kind of categorized that people just use throughout, I guess, dealing with treating or understanding the stages. It could be in grief. It's usually called the 5 stages of grief after someone passes away or loses a loved one. But in this, we're talking about of dealing with a diagnosis of terminally ill diagnosis. And again, I think you could go through these with any tragedy or event in your life. You kind of can go in and out of these stages when something bad happens. So we will have some test questions about the different stages and what they mean or represent. So you want to highlight that area. Talk about advanced directive, that's the next section. Especially with terminally ill patients, they're going to fill out that advanced directive and let the hospital know who's going to be in charge of their healthcare making decisions if they are not able to. This is also where DNR comes into play. Do they want to be resuscitated? The do not resuscitate order. And that's pretty much the end of our chapter 11. There's a chart that talks about physical problems that are going to come into effect with different exams we would have to do. We're not going to test you on those, but you can kind of look at that and start thinking about the different things that older people are going to have, especially little old ladies that are really skinny with frail bones, trying to get them to move onto the table with their skeletal system and hip problems, or depending on if they're having nervous issue problems. So it just tells you things you want to think about when you're talking to them as we get into taking care of these patients. Chapter 12 is history taking. We just got a few things to talk about here. And this is the things that we're going to quiz you on when you get into positioning class. You are going to do a patient interview, getting your patient from the waiting room, checking their ID, name and date of birth, making sure you have the right patient, bringing them into the room and then talking to them about their exam, making sure the orders match, getting a history of what happened to them. So this is a very important chapter with some certain things we have to do. And we're going to look at those. It's really short though. So number one is the chief complaint, or when we're getting a history, we want to get the chief complaint out of them. What's the main reason that they're here? So usually you will have a doctor's order and it'll say reason for exam. That's their number one reason. That's their chief complaint for what we're doing the x-ray for. But we're going to get more information from the patient once we talk to them to give to our doctor. And so that's what taking a history is going to do. So for us, we have interview skills we need to develop and practice. And it's really silly kind of when we make you guys do it with each other, because you kind of get robotic and you start going through your list of questions in your mind. I have a sheet that Miss Dean's made up. Once we get through all these and you get into positioning classes, we'll talk about that sheet for you guys in the lab, because you've probably been asked this before. On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad's your pain?
I always hated that question.
Yeah, it's not helpful to us. We're not giving them pain meds to relieve pain. So we don't want to hear you ask a patient that for an x-ray. We want to know, are you able to extend your arm out, move your hand for your x-ray? Are you able to stand and position yourself for the chest x-ray? We don't need to know your scale of pain level. So the book's going to talk about that, but when you get in positioning class, we're going to give you our sheet for getting a history for an exam. So we're going to go over like the general stuff here in the book now. There's two types of data that we're going to collect: objective data and subjective data, and that's on page 136 in blue under the data collection. So objective is things that you can kind of either see, hear, or feel. These are your senses. These are things that we can definitely record and write down as data. We can listen to their heart rate. We can feel their pulse. We could hear it. We can measure it, measure blood pressure, measure their temperature. So these are objective things. Subjective's a little bit trickier. This is things that are how the patient feels, what they are going through. So they're really tired. They feel out of breath. We can't measure how tired they are or how hard it is for them to breathe. There's like a elephant standing on their chest for chest pain for a heart attack. There's a stabbing pain that they feel. So those are things that the patient perceives. So that's subjective data. So we need to do both. One's not more important than the other. And we need to take that subjective data and use it. Some of it's over exaggerated, some of it's not really helpful for the interpretation of what the doctor needs, but we need to give him what we feel is the most important. We may not write every single thing the patient tells us. They may go back when they're telling us their history to something that happened 6 months ago. We only need that subjective data that we're getting for right now for the exam. So we're taking an interview, getting these patients to tell us what's going on so we can give our doctor some more information for when he reads the x-ray. And sometimes it also, we could give it back to the ER doctor. I'll have a patient come in for their x-ray after I've gotten them from the waiting room or something, or their actual exam room. And they'll be like, oh, I forgot to tell the nurse and doctor this. So then I will relay that to them because they forget to tell them when they're in the room certain things. So questioning skills is going to become important. There's some bullets that you want to know on 137 under questioning skills. Open-ended questions that do not lead, that let the patient tell the story. So if we kind of are going in there that they have appendicitis, which is a common thing we x-ray or CT for exactly, it's right lower quadrant pain. So if we think they have appendicitis and we go in there, oh, does your stomach hurt right here? And we point to their right lower quadrant, we're not giving them time to tell us their real history. We're just giving them a yes, no answer, and then we don't have any more information to give our doctor. We already are questioning that they have appendicitis, so we want them to tell us. So we're gonna say, like you guys said earlier, someone said, where does it hurt? Tell me what's been going on. So that's an open-ended question for us to gather more information from the patient. And then after they tell us something, then we're gonna encourage them to go on. We're gonna nod or say yes, or tell me more, okay, go on, what else happened? And then we're gonna have a little pause in silence to let the patient try to remember, and then they'll continue their talking. If we don't get quite what we think they were gonna say, we could ask them a detail-oriented question, probing question, to get them to describe it more. Tell me what type of pain it was. Was it a stabbing pain? And give them some choices. Then we can kind of narrow it down for them. And then after they've told us what they verbally told us, we're gonna re-talk out loud to them what we understood, reword it to clarify that we're interpreting what they said correctly. And then in that we're summarizing it on our paper afterwards for the doctor. So we do all histories starting out with open-ended, and then we kind of narrow it down to get the precise thing after we've gotten some information from the patient. Leading questions are avoiding. We should not do that because we could make them say something just because we think that that's what's happening with them. So down in the bottom it says leading questions. That could be a bias in history. So if we know somebody's having sciatica in their nerves in their back and it causes a pain to shoot down the patient's leg if you have sciatica, we don't want to go in with does the pain travel down your leg? And then they're going to be like, oh yeah, but maybe if we just said, tell me about your pain, what's going on, they'll tell us that pain travels down their leg. So it's a different way of getting the same information, but we want to make sure we're not putting the ideas into the patient's head so we can get accurate from them if that's what's really happening. So here's a box on 137 that talks about some things that we're going to ask about. With the chief complaint, usually we use the chest x-ray as a good example for a cough that they're coming in for. We want to localize it. If they're having pain when they cough, where is it at? Right or left side, upper, lower part of the chest. So we're going to take that chief complaint and get some more information about it. So localize the issues. Chronology, how long has it been going on? That's the chronology. How long have you had this cough? The quality of it, is it productive? Are you coughing up anything? The severity of it. If you are coughing up stuff, how much about? How often? How severe is it? The onset, how long ago? When did it start? What was going on when this started? Were you sick and then it turned into pneumonia, it got worse? Aggravating or alleviating factors. So what makes it worse? What makes it better? When you sleep, do you cough more? Sitting up is easier, better? And then anything associated manifestations. Anything else that has come from this cough. Maybe now you cough so much that you're having pain in your abdomen muscles because you cough so much. I've had that happen when I was really, really sick. I coughed so much, my stomach started hurting, the abdomen muscles started hurting. Not that I need anything done. I don't need to go to the doctor for that. It'll just go away. But We could also ask, has there been trauma? Did they fall off of a roof or a car accident or anything? Prior surgeries. We always want to find out prior surgeries if they had a pacemaker put in or something. So we always want to localize it and do those 5 or 6 things: localize, chronology, quality, severity, onset, anything make it worse or better, and any new things come from it.
Can you explain the difference between chronologically, or oh my gosh.
Chronology is just
Can't
when.
speak. That and onset.
Oh yeah. Let me see what our book says about the onset chronology. It doesn't. Well, yeah, it does. So the time element. So that includes onset, frequency, and course. So chronology is all of it. There we go. So the time of what's been going on through the thing is chronology, really, from the beginning to now. Onset is when it just started. So I probably misspoke by saying that.
No, I forgot it was written in the book. I just thought it was just a chart that had it listed. I
just was looking at it to go over it first, and I pretty much went over all this stuff that's in the paragraph. So the Sacred 7 is on page 138. That's also the same thing we just looked at in the green box. Those little bullets, that's what you're going to do when you do your interview with your history with each other. When we come back to campus next week, depending on how busy we are, I'm going to have you guys do some scenarios with each other. I didn't want to do it on the live because it's better to be in person. We're going to put you guys, somebody in a wheelchair that can't hardly stand, and do a patient history and things like that. So we're going to localize the pain. We're going to get the timeline. We're going to talk about the quality of it, the severity, the onset, anything that make it worse or better, and associated manifestations. So those main things right there, the Sacred 7, that's what we're going to quiz you on the exam when you're taking your patient history. And that's it, guys. Have a good day. Man, this week is over for us pretty much.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have an exam.
And then raise your hand down the list.
The patient.
I don't know about her, but you know, see. All right. Hold on. Jessica, and then I'll go down to Eric, I think is next. What?
So I guess there was a lot of miscommunication on how today was supposed to be ran. I just kind of want to go over what's going to be done tomorrow so we all are on the same page and know what to expect.
Yeah, so tomorrow I looked at the week 2. For this week, under week 2, I changed it to no quiz, so we will not have a quiz tomorrow. Anytime we're doing our lives and not on campus, thank you, my eyes all better, guys, I'm so glad. We'll do our quiz at 8 a.m. just like we were on campus. So to make sure we're following the 8 a.m., you have to be at campus to do the quiz. You have to log into Zoom to get the password for the quiz to take it. You guys that took the quiz today, I don't know how you got the password. I'm not gonna give you a 0 for it, but if you were on campus, you would not have been allowed to take the quiz. So for future Zooms, when we're not on campus at 8 a.m. to do the quiz, we'll do it on here just like that. Everybody log in at 8, and I'll put the password in on Zoom for you to get the quiz.
Yeah, that was just a little confusing because last week I wrote notes that on Thursday, or not Thursday, Wednesday when we were in here, you were like, do the quiz and then log in at 8:30. So I did exactly that. So there was just some miscommunication. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. So Friday, again, we'll come in Zoom first, just like we did last week, because that was different. Wednesday and Friday last week were different. So do the Zoom, do the test on Friday.
Yep. Okay. And then everybody is good for today. Your quiz, I think everybody did it. You're good. I just want to make sure for future, everybody knew. That's the reason for the 8 a.m. thing for time. All right, Eric, go ahead and unmute. And then Jessica had her hand raised too. No, Elizabeth had her hand raised.
The Sacred 7, that's going to be on the exam. You said something about patient exam or patient.
That's what you are going to do. The Sacred 7 is how you're going to do your patient history and take a history from a patient. So that's the Sacred 7.
Oh,
that's
in class?
Exam, yep.
And it's going to be on the exam as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, Sarah, you're good. And then, where'd you go? Elizabeth.
Hey, so I was hoping to attend office hours tomorrow with you. Schedule that, or are you just gonna be in there?
So I'll do a live. What time is your CPR supposed to be over? That's my question. What time do you want to do since you're asking? Normally it's after 1 to 2 or so, but do you want to do later? That's what I'm asking you now.
Yeah, we could. If later works for you, I would be okay with doing it like later on in the day. I don't know.
Because that's what I don't know how long you're going to be on with CPR. So let's shoot for 2, maybe.
We can do 2.
Okay, so I'll be on here on the same link from 2 o'clock till 2:33, whenever we need for
Yeah,
review.
it says CPR is 9 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Okay,
on Blackboard here. It's in, if you go to week 2 and click on CPR course info.
Yeah, I couldn't remember what his schedule was like for you guys. So you'll be done by 1, and then I'll be available. Tomorrow already is Thursday. It's crazy. So fast the week's going by.
Michael, you said it starts at 8:45?
Well, it says join the link at 8:45 so we can take roll and start on time. And then it just says Kaiser Jacksonville RT BLS classroom Thursday, September 10th, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Yeah, so
then there's a link.
Mm-hmm.
That
Do we
makes
still have to log in with you for Kaiser Live at 8 a.m. tomorrow, though?
No, nothing for me tomorrow.
Okay.
Now, is our homework due tomorrow, the medical terminology?
It's due Friday at 8.
Okay, okay.
Another day.
Okay, so so tomorrow, can we do 1 o'clock then, Miss Love? Because I have a Zoom doctor's appointment at 2 that I just.
1 p.m. works. I just didn't want you to be stuck from CPR straight over if it was 1 o'clock ending. So noon's good for ending that, and you have a break. I'll make an announcement after this for tutoring at 1 tomorrow. There is a link under the Meet Your Instructor to submit questions. So go ahead and look at that. If you have any questions, make some up, turn that into me so I have track of who and what we're going to talk about, kind of.
One last question. The review, like for chapters, where can we find the answers to that?
Good question. They used to be in the book. They're not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have one that you don't know if you got it right or not, just send me an email and I'll look at it.
Got it. Thank you.
No Zoom tomorrow, Eric, and I will make an announcement after this of that recapping. 8 a.m. Friday, and then we'll be done after we review our exam. If it looks like we're not going to have time to review it, we'll review it on Monday. We may just do that anyway. That might make it easier so people can get to their CPR class on time. So just take your exam with us. We'll all be together at 8 on Friday for the exam. All right, guys, have a good day.